The call came at 11:14 on a Tuesday night. I remember the exact time because I'd just finished my third cup of coffee, the real stuff, not the break room sludge, and I was cross-checking the flagged anomalies from the afternoon batch when my phone lit up with my boss's name. Not a text, a call. At 11:14 p.m., I picked up. "Come to my office first thing tomorrow," he said. 8 o'clock sharp. That was it. No context. No hey, got a minute, warm up. Just 8 o'clock sharp, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a moment with the phone still in my hand, staring at the compliance dashboard I'd spent 6 years building. The cursor blinked at me like it was waiting for something. I set the phone face down on the desk and went back to the anomalies. There were 3 of them, small, almost imperceptible drifts in the overnight settlement figures. Nothing that would show up on a standard audit sweep, but I'd seen drifts like these before, back in 2019, right before a regional bank in Ohio quietly settled a $40 million fraud case that never made the evening news. I flagged all 3, documented everything, sent it to the queue. Then I went home, and I didn't sleep. Hargrove Capital Partners had been my whole professional life for a decade. Not glamorous. Compliance never is. You don't get the corner office or the car service or the expense accounts that could fund a small country. What you get is the satisfaction of knowing that when the numbers say something's wrong, you're the one who catches it before it becomes someone's retirement savings, disappearing into a wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. I was good at what I did, not good in the way people say it at performance reviews to soften the next sentence. Good in the way that the SEC had personally complimented our firm's internal audit structure during a 2022 regulatory review. Good in the way that 3 separate whistleblower cases I'd quietly flagged over the years had ended with federal charges against people who thought they were untouchable. My name is James Kowalski. I'm 52 years old. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the son of a steel mill accountant who told me every single night at dinner that the only thing that mattered in any business was whether the numbers told the truth. My father had a saying, "The books don't lie. People do. Your job is to make sure the books are louder." I took that seriously, maybe too seriously, according to some people. According to my boss, I took it way too seriously. His name was Arthur Bellows, COO, 15 years at the firm, which meant he'd been there longer than me, but had somehow managed to avoid learning how any of the actual systems worked. Arthur was the kind of executive who confused confidence with competence. He walked into rooms like he owned them, shook hands like he was running for office, and made decisions the way someone plays poker when they don't know the rules, loudly and with total commitment. I'd had my share of disagreements with Arthur over the years. He wanted faster turnaround on approvals. I explained that faster turnaround on approvals was how you missed the things that got you hauled in front of a Senate subcommittee. He wanted to streamline the client onboarding documentation. I explained that the client onboarding documentation existed because the Patriot Act wasn't a suggestion. He wanted to give his assistant more system access so she could handle some of the routine stuff. I explained that there was no such thing as routine stuff when you were managing $9.2 billion in client assets. That last one, the assistant thing, I think that's when things started to go sideways between us. The morning of the meeting, I got there at 7:45. I always got there early. I brought my own coffee from the place on the corner that did a proper pour-over, not because I was precious about it, but because good coffee before a hard conversation was something my father had also believed in. Arthur's office was on the 31st floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river, a desk that probably cost more than my first car. He was already there when I arrived, which surprised me. Arthur was not an early morning person. He was also not alone, sitting in the chair across from his desk with the particular posture of someone who has been told their whole life that rooms belonged to them, was a young woman I'd never seen before. She looked maybe 27, sharp blazer, laptop open on her knees, the kind of practiced confident expression that either came from genuine ability or from never having been told no. I learned later she had an MBA from Duke, 2 years at a boutique consulting firm in Charlotte, and exactly 0 experience in financial compliance. Her name was Courtney Bellows, as in the COO's niece. Arthur didn't let me sit down before he started talking. "James," he said, "I'm going to be direct with you, because that's the kind of leader I am." That phrase, "that's the kind of leader I am," should have been my first warning. We've been doing some restructuring, looking at the compliance function holistically, and what we found is that your approach, while thorough, has created a culture of delay that's starting to cost us. I looked at him. I looked at Courtney. She was typing something on her laptop. Cost you how? I said. Client acquisition timelines. Onboarding friction. Approval bottlenecks. I've got 3 institutional accounts that almost walked last quarter because of turnaround times in your department. Those turnaround times exist because 2 of those 3 accounts had incomplete beneficial ownership documentation. One of them had a UBO registered in a jurisdiction under OFAC sanctions. We flagged it. We escalated it. James. He said my name the way people say stop. We're not here to relitigate past decisions. We're here to talk about the future. He folded his hands on the desk. Courtney is going to be stepping into a restructured role, Senior Compliance Operations Manager. She'll be taking over day-to-day approvals, client-facing processes, and system access management. You'll be transitioning to an advisory function. The room got very quiet. An advisory function, I said. Consultative. Your institutional knowledge is an asset. We don't want to lose that. Arthur. I kept my voice level. I'd learned a long time ago that the moment you get loud in a room like this, you've already lost. We have an SEC examination scheduled for the 18th. That's 11 days from now. You're talking about transitioning system access to someone who has never worked in a regulated financial environment in the middle of a federal examination cycle. Courtney has an exceptional background. Her background is in process optimization. That's not the same thing. The examination is going to include a deep review of our AML transaction monitoring system. That system took 3 years to build. The logic trees alone, James. He said it again. Softer this time. Almost apologetic. We've made the decision. Courtney closed her laptop and smiled at me. It wasn't a mean smile. That almost made it worse. I'm looking forward to learning from you during the transition, she said. I spent the rest of that day writing the most detailed transition documentation any human being has ever produced. 47 pages. System architecture, escalation protocols, flagging thresholds, the 3 categories of SAR triggers, our monitoring picked up on, the specific reason the overnight settlement batches needed manual review on Wednesdays because of a quirk in how one of our prime brokers processed end-of-day positions. I sent it to Arthur. I sent a copy to the Chief Risk Officer, CC'd Legal, and BC'd to my personal email because I've been doing this long enough to know that paper trails matter. Then I handed over my system credentials, walked Courtney through the dashboard for 4 hours. She asked good questions. I'll give her that. And I went back to my office, which was now technically just an office with no particular function attached to it. 3 days passed. Courtney was enthusiastic, which in compliance is sometimes more dangerous than being incompetent, because enthusiasm without judgment leads to fast decisions, and fast decisions in AML monitoring lead to either missed flags or overflagging, and both of those have consequences that don't show up immediately. On the 4th day, she came and found me. Hey, and tell me if this is something I should know. Why does the system lock out certain vendor codes from the expedited approval pathway? I put down my coffee. Which vendor codes? She showed me her laptop screen. She'd been trying to streamline the approval queue. I understood the impulse. I did. And in doing so, she'd identified what looked to her like unnecessary friction, a set of vendor-linked accounts that kept getting routed through a longer secondary review. Those accounts were flagged for secondary review because they were associated with a cluster of shell entities our monitoring had identified 18 months ago as potentially structuring transactions, not confirmed, but flagged, and in compliance. Flagged means do not touch until further review. Not this seems inefficient, let me remove the friction. I explained this to her. She nodded seriously. Okay, she said, so I shouldn't have approved the 3 that came through this morning? I won't describe exactly what I felt in that moment because there's no word for the particular combination of cold dread and professional resignation that settles over you when you realize that the thing you spent 6 years preventing has just happened on day 4 of the new regime. You approved them, I said. It wasn't a question. They'd been sitting in queue for 48 hours. I thought, pull them up. She pulled them up. The 3 transactions totaled $2.3 million across 4 accounts, all routing to an intermediary with a registered address in Delaware that I recognized immediately, not because it was in our system as flagged, but because I had spent 4 months in 2022 correlating it to a pattern of layering transactions that a federal task force was quietly investigating. I knew this because I had been the person who first flagged a pattern and sent it to FinCEN through our SAR filing system. Courtney, I said, and I was very careful to keep my voice completely calm. Do you know what a suspicious activity report is? Of course, she said, a little defensively. Did you check whether any of these accounts had open SAR filings before you approved them? The silence that followed was answer enough. I went to Arthur's office. He was on a call. I waited outside for 11 minutes. When he came to the door, I told him we needed to talk immediately and in private. James, I'm in the middle of Arthur. This is not a conversation that can wait. He read something in my face because he let me in. I explained what had happened. All of it. The flagged vendor cluster, the open SAR filings, the 3 approved transactions, the Delaware intermediary, the federal task force. I watched his face go through several distinct phases. Dismissal, then confusion, then something that looked uncomfortably like fear. How bad is this? He said. Potentially very bad. The SEC examination is in 8 days. If they pull transaction records, and they will, they're going to find 3 approved transactions tied to accounts with open SAR filings. That's not a paperwork issue. That's a potential willful blindness finding. That's regulatory action. That's fines. That's personal liability. He was quiet for a long moment. What do we need to do? He said. You need to reverse those transactions immediately and document the reversal. You need to file an amended SAR. You need to brief the Chief Compliance Officer, the actual one, not the restructured role you just created, and you need to do all of this before close of business today. He nodded slowly. Okay, I don't have system access anymore, I said. You gave it to Courtney. The next 48 hours were the kind of organized chaos that looked calm from the outside. Arthur called in our outside counsel. The CCO, who had been kept out of the restructuring conversation entirely and was, as I suspected, furious, took over point. The transactions were reversed. The amended SAR was filed. A complete review of everything Courtney had touched in 4 days was initiated. I sat in my advisory function office and answered questions when people came to ask them, which they did. Constantly. On the 3rd day, the chief risk officer came to see me. Her name was Barbara Wynn, and she was one of the most precise thinkers I'd ever worked with. The kind of person who asked exactly the question she needed answered and listened to the whole answer before speaking again. Walk me through the timeline, she said. I walked her through it. All of it. Including the 47 pages of transition documentation I'd written and sent to Arthur, the CCO and legal on the day of the restructuring, including the BC to my personal email. She looked at me for a moment after I finished. You knew this was going to happen, she said. I knew something like it was going to happen, I said. I didn't know the specifics. I never do. That's why the systems exist. She was quiet. The systems you built, she said. The systems I built, I agreed. The SEC examination began on the 18th as scheduled. I was asked to be present for the full 2 weeks as a subject matter expert, not in my advisory capacity, just as James Kowalski, the person who had built and operated the compliance infrastructure for 6 years, and apparently still knew more about it than anyone else in the building. The examiners were professional and thorough, which is exactly what you want from federal regulators. They found the amended RA. They found the documentation trail. They found the documentation trail. They found the reversal records. They found my 47 pages of transition notes. They also found that Arthur had restructured a critical compliance function 11 days before a scheduled federal examination without notifying the board, the CCO, or legal, and had installed a person with no regulated industry experience in a role with full system access to AML monitoring infrastructure. I was not in the room for the conversation between the examination team and Arthur. I heard about it afterward, the way you hear about a storm you missed, through the accounts of people who were there and through the particular silence that followed. Arthur was put on administrative leave the Friday after the examination concluded. Courtney, and I want to be clear about this, Courtney was not malicious. She was in over her head, placed there by someone who should have known better. She resigned 2 weeks later. I hope she found something she was actually suited for. The board called me in on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the examination ended. Barbara Wynn was there. The general counsel was there. 2 independent board members I'd never spoken to directly were there. They offered me my job back, my actual job. Not the advisory function, not a restructured version of it, but the role with the title and the access and the authority that the role required. They also told me that a full review of the restructuring decision had been completed and that the board had concluded it was made unilaterally and without appropriate governance oversight. They used language that was very careful and very deliberate, the kind of language that lawyers write, and what it meant in plain English was, Arthur made a bad call for the wrong reasons, and it almost cost us a federal enforcement action. I said I'd think about it overnight. That night, I drove home through the city. The same route I'd been driving for 10 years, past the diner where I got breakfast before early meetings, past the hardware store my father used to take me to when I was a kid visiting my aunt on the south side, past the park where I used to eat lunch when I needed to think without anyone finding me. I thought about my father and his books that didn't lie. I thought about the 3 transactions, the $2.3 million, the Delaware intermediary, the federal task force that was still, as far as I knew, quietly doing its work. I thought about the flagged anomalies I'd been looking at the night Arthur called me. Those 3 small drifts in the overnight settlement figures. The next morning, I called Barbara Ween. "I'll come back," I said, "but I need 2 things." "Tell me," she said. "First, full reporting authority to the board, not through the COO. If I flag something, it goes straight up. No filtering." "Done," she said, without hesitating. "Second, the 3 anomalies from the overnight batch on the 12th, the ones I flagged before any of this happened. I need to know those haven't been touched." There was a pause. "I'll have IT pull the audit log." "I already know what the audit log will show," I said. "I want to know if anyone went looking at those accounts after I flagged them." She pulled up the log while we were on the phone. I heard the sound of her typing and then a silence that went on a few seconds longer than it should have. "James," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Someone accessed those 3 accounts on the 13th, the day after you flagged them." "What time?" 6:47 in the morning. I'd been in the office until midnight on the 12th. Arthur's call came at 11:14. He'd reached out to schedule the meeting. "What user credential accessed them?" I asked, though I already knew. She told me Arthur's credential. I sat with that for a moment, not with satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. Not with the feeling that I'd caught him in something, or that justice was being served in some neat and cinematic way. What I felt was tired. The particular kind of tired that comes from being right about something you desperately wished you were wrong about. "Barbara," I said, "you need to get the general counsel on a call. Right now. Not tomorrow. Now." What happened after that is still, in some respects, a matter of ongoing proceedings that I can't discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that the credential access log, combined with the timing of the restructuring decision and certain other documentation that emerged during a subsequent internal investigation, resulted in Arthur Bellows' separation from the firm being escalated from administrative leave to termination for cause. It also resulted in a referral to federal authorities. I don't know what stage that referral is at. I don't ask. That's not my job. My job is the books. I came back on a Monday. My office was exactly as I'd left it, minus the transition documentation I had sent and 1 empty coffee mug that someone had apparently taken and never returned, which honestly bothered me more than it should have. I sat down at my desk. I logged into the system with my restored credentials. The dashboard came up, the monitoring queues, the flagging alerts, the overnight batch summaries, the escalation status panel. Everything was waiting. There were 14 items in the review queue. One of them was a pattern I'd never seen before. Not exactly, but close enough to something I'd flagged in 2021 that my brain started working through it before I'd consciously decided to start. I pulled up the account history. I cross-referenced the intermediary registry. I opened a new documentation file and started typing. My coffee was from the corner place. Pour over, same as always. Some people hear the word rigid and think it means unable to adapt, unable to grow, stuck. I think it means something different. I think it means knowing which things can flex and which things cannot. I think it means understanding that a bridge is not rigid because the engineer didn't have any other ideas. A bridge is rigid because rigidity is the only thing standing between you and the river. I thought about the clients whose money moved through our systems every day. Pension funds, university endowments, retirement accounts belonging to people who'd spent 40 years working so they could stop working. They didn't know my name. They would never know my name. They would never know how close it came. That was fine. That was the job. The cursor blinked at me and I kept going. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the sequence of events. I have those memorized down to the minute. But the why underneath all of it. Arthur didn't fire me because I was slow. He fired me because I was inconvenient. And there's a difference that matters. Slow is a performance problem. Inconvenient means you're the thing standing between someone and what they want. I was never slow. I was inconvenient. Every time he wanted to cut a corner and I explained exactly which federal regulation that corner was holding up, I became a little more inconvenient. Every time I escalated something he wanted buried in the queue, I became a little more inconvenient. Eventually, inconvenient became too cautious, because that sounds like a professional assessment instead of what it actually was. I was in the way. That's the first thing I learned from all of this. The people who enforce standards will always be characterized as the problem by the people who benefit from ignoring them. It doesn't mean the standards are wrong. It means the characterization is. The second thing is about Courtney. And I want to be fair to her because she deserves that. She wasn't malicious. She was genuinely trying to do well. She came in with energy and ideas and a real desire to make things work. What she didn't have was the accumulated understanding of why things are the way they are. The institutional memory of every near miss and actual miss that shaped each protocol, each flagging threshold, each slagging threshold, each secondary review requirement. She didn't know what she didn't know, and nobody gave her the chance to find out before handing her the keys. That's not her failure. That's Arthur's. You don't put someone behind the wheel of something they don't understand yet and call it confidence. You call it negligence, and eventually the road finds you out. The third thing is the one I keep coming back to, the one that feels most personal. For years, I watched people get promoted around me because they were more comfortable in meetings, more polished, better at the performance of leadership. I was good at the actual work, which is not the same thing, and in a lot of organizations, it is actively penalized. I never learned to make the work look easier than it was. I never learned to smile through disagreements instead of having them directly. I was told more than once that I needed to read the room better. What I've come to understand is that reading the room and reading the numbers are two different skills, and you need people who are genuinely committed to both. An organization that optimizes entirely for room readers will eventually end up in a room with federal examiners, wondering how it got there. I don't carry what happened with any bitterness. I want to be clear about that. What I carry is a kind of quiet certainty, the kind that only comes from having been tested and not having moved. The books didn't lie. They never do. People construct narratives around the numbers, and sometimes those narratives are very convincing, and sometimes they hold for a very long time, but the numbers sit there, patient and indifferent, waiting. My father taught me that. I thought I understood it when he said it. I understand it differently now. I came back to my desk on a Monday morning, logged in with my restored credentials, and found 14 items waiting in the review queue. I started with the first one. That's always how it goes. One thing at a time, done right, documented completely, no shortcuts. Not because I'm rigid. Because the people whose money moves through those systems every single day deserve someone who takes that seriously. I take it seriously. That has always been enough for me.